Hello, project people. You're listening to the soothing sounds of the Project Chatter podcast. I'm your host, Mr. Val Matthews, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Mr. Dale Fung.
Hey Val, hello everyone. I hope all you listeners are doing well. I think today's pod is going to be particularly spicy and thought-provoking. So let's
Spicy.
Yeah.
Well, maybe
Maybe.
soothing and spicy. I'm looking forward to it. Get in. I'm with you, Dale, and just to our listeners to hit that subscribe button on whichever platform you listen to your good podcasts on, and don't forget our YouTube channel for the full podcast and our guest bonus bits and Q&A. And if you'd like to sponsor the Project Podcast, you can. You can get in touch with us via our website, projectchatterpodcast.com. But let's get on with it. So in this pod, we are joined by Dimitrios or Dimi Farmakis from Alice Technologies, and he's going to be talking about why the critical path method or CPM fails and what comes next. Hey, Dimi, thanks for joining us today.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. I appreciate the chat.
Excellent. Before we get stuck into the content and the context of what CPM and what's next, here is Dale with Dimi's bio.
Cheers, Val. So Dimi is the VP of product at Alice, where he works on revolutionizing the construction industry with integrated processes and artificial intelligence. So exciting already. That's just the first sentence. Dimi has been heavily involved with Alice from the early days of R&D, working on product prototyping and beta testing, as well as leading customer success for 2 years. As a lecturer at Stanford University and TedX speaker, he also lends his expertise on the benefits of sustainable building design and BIM. Dimi holds a master's in civil and environmental engineering from Stanford University. Prior to Alice, he founded Solvia Studio, I hope I pronounced that correctly, and BIM Consulting Services in Greece. So welcome, Dimi. As Val said, it is a great pleasure to have you on this pod. I guess first off, Greece, you've traveled the world a bit. From Greece, where did you go?
So from Greece, I went to UK for a year for my previous master's in innovations research. And this is what UK does to you. You can hear it in my obnoxious accent. Then I worked in the Netherlands for a little bit, doing some operations management. And then I was like, oh, what the hell, just, switch domains and go to Stanford and do some civil engineering. Before that, I was more on the business operations research and optimization side of things. So a lot of quantitative stuff still, but not civil engineering. I traveled quite a bit with Alice because before doing product, I was doing everything like in every other startup. And at some point I was heading our customer success department, which required quite a lot of traveling because I was implementing our tool around the planet, various types of customers, various types of projects. And fortunately enough, at various locations in the world. Right now, especially due to COVID, I don't travel as much, unfortunately, like everyone else. But, thankfully, through technology, we vicariously travel, in various areas, chatting to chaps like yourselves all around the world. So trying to get by with the substitutes here.
No, you're right. It is a strange world we're living in, and hopefully there's some light at the end of the tunnel with the vaccines and things that are happening today. But it would be remiss of us not to mention the 4D Construction Group guys, and special thanks to James, DJ, and Chris, for putting us in touch, because they sing your praises, and you've got some fascinating and amazing technology at Alice. But and we'll touch on that. But we're more
glad to hear that.
But we're more after understanding why the critical path method fails, because everyone's probably thinking, "What the hell? What else do I do?" I mean, surely it's the critical path method. There is no other way.
The be and end all. Yeah.
It is exactly. It's the backbone. How can you challenge that? So I think it's going to be a really, really exciting one. Just before we get into why it fails, can we set a baseline You know, we love baselines in the project world. In your,
Yes.
in your words, Dimi, what is the definition of a critical path method?
So, tough question. The main ingredients, at the loss of a better word, are the following. Part of it is the theory or the science behind it. Like everyone knows, you know, forward, backward pass, the network diagram, free float, earliest start, earliest finish, latest start, latest finish, you know, all the John Fondle related theory. But for me, I'm being a bit obnoxious by having the tendency to be a systemic systems thinker. So for me, it's not just the theory behind it or the tools, whether you call it P6 or MS Project or spreadsheet or what was the other thing that's smart sheets is one of the latest trends. But it's also the system around it, you know, how the data communicates between the different disciplines, how these different disciplines collaborate, you know, communicate, and so on and so forth. And to my limited knowledge so far, the critical path has been, I guess, the cornerstone of all that system, like especially when you're talking about, you know, project planning, durations, and risk management. So I guess this is a baseline for me. This is how I would package what you call like the CPM like world. Would you like to add any layer to it, or
no? I think that's a great definition. You know, it's in simple terms for those that don't understand project management or schedules at all. For me, it's just you know, what is the quickest path through your project schedule?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yep.
But that is conventional planning, right? That is
correct.
Conventional planning, and I guess we could go into that as well. What is conventional planning? And I don't know if there's actually a definition for conventional planning. And maybe
I don't think there is.
Yeah, and maybe this is why it fails. But anyway, we'll leave the debate out there, because I have heard, and I think we mentioned before, that, you know, us controls people and include planning in there and risk. You know, we've been compared to plumbers or electricians. And so you'll go in and you'll look at someone else's schedule and you'll go, oh, why did they do it like that? Why did they plan it like that?
Exactly.
That's logical.
The $1 million question.
Exactly. So perhaps there isn't a standard way of planning, because it depends who you are and what your experiences are. And so this is probably where technology comes in, but I don't want to speculate. I want to hear, so why does the critical path method fail? You know, if I can schedule out my project plan in the traditional ways, and let's say they're waterfall ways, and I can get my fastest path through that, why does it fail?
So before we dive into the details and we start fighting and, you know, going back and forth, let me try and I guess make a poor man's effort of, you know, shedding some light on defining the conventional planning that you mentioned. First off, I think it's extremely interesting that you chose the word planning and not scheduling. And I think this is where the essence of conventional planning or scheduling, make your pick, like, relies. And I think this is where, or one of the cornerstone aspects why CPM fails, because in today's world, a lot of professionals and companies, they don't distinguish between the two. Like, there's what is the difference between a plan and a schedule, right? And as you know, probably much better than me from your experience, everyone just dives into the schedule. Yep. Everyone is like, let's create a schedule, let's open up our tool and start drawing precedence relationships. However, there is a distinct difference. A plan is essentially, you know, a list of activities, basically what you need to do in order to build this project. You know, with the relationships, you know, production rates, you know, all the data that goes with them. A schedule is essentially assigning start and end dates to those activities. such that no constraints are violated. There's a difference between the two because, and this is, I guess I will use this as a segue to start, the debate about CPM. This is, I guess, one of the cornerstone aspects why it fails, because the plan essentially encompasses all the rules, all the assumptions, all the thought process that goes into like making a project into a reality. But when you are like throwing it out of the window and you're like focusing solely on the schedule, things start becoming unclear and fuzzy. You can form what-if analysis because you don't really know what your assumptions were. And secondly, the rules are unclear. Actually, you already mentioned that, right? You looking at someone else's schedule and you're like scratching your head. You're like, okay, why did you do it this way? Or, and subsequently, it's difficult to assess the impact on metrics because it's very difficult to like change things, right? You're presented with a rigid snapshot of reality, which might be great. I'm sure there are like many competent and schedulers and planners out there. But what about all the other stuff that can happen, right? So I guess the first reason for this debate about CPM is that there's no transparency. Everything is modeled through precedents, and the scheduler or planner is tasked with something that I think is a bit inhumane. They're trying to model all types of constraints, whether it's, resource limitations, physics, space, calendars, whatever it may be, material deliveries. They're tasked to like model all those different complex stuff only through precedents. So when someone aside the scheduler tries to ask questions, or even a lot of times when the scheduler needs to communicate their schedule, it's very difficult to have a, let's say, meaningful discussion or calm discussion, not being feisty about it, like about what does that arrow represent? Like, why did you draw that relationship from A to B? Is it because you were thinking about the crane availability? Was it because, there was a physical sort of thing? And as a result, as you may already understand, that makes it extremely difficult to identify and align on what the real bottleneck for the task is, whether it's a delay or not. Please feel free to chime in, by the way, otherwise I'm going to keep blabbering. Another reason is CPM, the way of the approach, the approach itself, like presents you with only one option, right? There is a competent professional who is trying to wrap their heads around this, like, as I said, inhumane complexity that construction projects present. And, they're trying to come up with a way to like make this happen. What about all the other ways? What about all the other sequences? As I'm sure everyone knows, there are like thousands of ways to build something. In one of our hipster Alice presentation slides, we basically present that there are like 35,000 to build a box with some very like simple assumptions. So you can imagine how much that number, like skyrockets when you're talking about like complex projects. So we talked about transparency. We talked about sequence. What else is there? Yes. So for me, as I said, this kind of delves into the system of the whole thing. There's no integration. So as everyone knows, in order to make sound and informed project management decisions, you need to think about three things, right? You need to think about the work or the schedule, the work packages, the WBS, call it however you want. You need to think about the scope, in other words, the design, basically what do you need to build, but also the cost. So in the, I don't want to call it the CPM world, so I'm going to call it the conventional world. As these three aspects are siloed. They're not like connected to each other.
Agreed.
As a result, and I'm sure you guys probably experience it. it's very difficult to have a clear clear visibility into how these different interrelationships work and what is the impact and how does the impact cascades to the other system. In other words, it's very difficult for your project control systems to accurately represent what is really going on in your project, both during planning, but more importantly, during execution, right? A very typical, yeah.
If we just jump in there, I just found it fascinating when you mentioned planning versus scheduling, and we've had this sort of discussion before about the differences and what it means,
nice.
And we've been provocative about, you know, how the scheduler is just a P6 jockey, really, for the most part. And you know, we discussed how we always somehow seem to upset someone on every pod. That probably listens to us, but that's okay too. We're here to disrupt a little bit. But I think a couple of things that pop up if we just pause and just think about what you've just said there. One thing is I've experienced this, and I'm sure you all have on the call as well. I've often gone in to a new project setup and I've seen the schedule and I've said, well, okay, so you've got an integrated schedule. Where's your integrated plan? Where's your IMP? And they're like, what do you mean?
Exactly.
I'm like, and I think that's what you're referring to. It's how have you brought everything together before you've just jumped into a Primavera or a Microsoft project, you know, or any other tool, scheduling tool that you're talking about. And so I think that's fascinating, because if we just pause and think about that, a lot of people don't appreciate that there's a key difference there. And the fact that you're highlighting it still today is quite astounding if you think about it, because scheduling and planning have been, well, they're symbiotic, but they're also separate at the same time, right? And it's been around for such a long time, yet you go in and you go, oh, there's my planner, and you go, what does he do? Oh, he puts stuff into P6. You go, okay. So
exactly.
And part of the problem, we spoke about this, is one, education. And this is why we do things like this, the podcast, to share that insight. But two, I just think that the desire in the pipeline isn't there. So people inherently in the organizations that exist, they're not trained in the correct ways.
Yes.
And so they only know what they know. So you can't really blame people as such. It's our system that we work in, our industry that we work in. We haven't done enough. So I just wanted to pause and comment on that. But also, just to bring Val in there, Val, I know you've got quite a lot of thoughts on this. We had a debate in episode 30 in season 2 around, you know, is there anything better than the critical path method? And we had a whole bunch of panelist experts, and we struggled a little bit. But Val, jump in. Over to you, mate.
We did. And there is, I mean, there's elements where it does work. I mean, I know defense, you say integrated master plan, they do have integrated plans. But what we are saying this, I think we're inferring at least, that critical path method isn't going to get you accuracy because it is a model. It's a representation of everything that's put into it. And we've challenged this before, where it's actually about the quality of the inputs. So even if you decompose your scope, if you resource it, if you labor it up, if you dot down all your assumptions, if you limit all your constraints, if you articulate all the risks, you get a representation. And you're right, there's not one scenario, there's multiple scenarios. It's kind of like a multiverse, but we don't think in terms of dimensions when we talk about planning. We tend to think about this in this two-dimensional space where you have this flat Gantt chart, and that somehow a forward and a backward pass is going to give you your early and late start dates or finish dates, which in fact it's probably the most primitive way to report on a project, because projects are getting bigger and more complex and more complicated. And so how do you do, and I think this is where we start talking about technology. It's like there's a point in time in which, you know, humans are at their limit in terms of capacity, right? To understand, to comprehend, to calculate. And we have to bring in machines to help us. Like we can only run so fast, so we created it. Now we got a car. And if we want to compute, you know, we needed a computer. So now we're getting to that point where if we want to plan, we need a planning machine to provide that. So I'm not convinced that a critical path method is the best way at all. I think a lot of people are holding on to it because it's the only way they know. And in the absence of a red line in their schedule, what do they do? Where do they go? It's a very disruptive nature to think that if you removed the CPM, you really have no benchmark at all. So you leave all these industries open. And this is the hard part about changing people's minds, hearts and minds is all what projects are about, is how do you then get them to the next solution? And we haven't got into the next solution yet, but how do you wean them off critical path method and bring them into the future? And I'd love to talk about that for a minute if we could.
Oh, absolutely. So I'm really fascinated by your perspective, both of you, because truth be told, we are encountered with those friction points, like in every customer engagement with Alice. To kind of like take a step back and build up on your points, I wouldn't put the blame on the professionals either. I think it's a systemic fallacy that governs construction, which has to do with the fact that if you think about the construction process model is rigid and siloed. You have a design, then someone takes that design, estimates the cost, and then someone takes this cost and resource information and tries to build a schedule around it, right? This is very rigid and like it doesn't allow for exploration or anything. To that end, like technology and methods and systems definitely help. And this is actually something that, you know, Alice enables, right? I'm not going to talk about Alice, so let me generalize or abstract a little bit. So model-based systems allow, by model, I'm not referring to the casual architectural 3D model. I'm talking about, you know, simulation models here, you know, models that, you know, allow you to build, you know, a representation of reality, mess around with it and gauge reactions from it and learn from it, which is a similar system like Alice Technologies is using. Such models immediately, with the approach in itself, transform the construction process model into something dynamic, where everything is in one place and you have a clear mapping between the three cornerstone aspects, right? Design, cost, and schedule. So that is the systemic aspect of things. About the organizational aspect you mentioned, oh, Jesus. Yeah, I mean, in all honesty, I think organizations organically have reached similar conclusions that, look, we need to change the way we do things. But how? What is the first step towards that? I call it next generation builder, right? How can I make my company the next generation, you know, GC or the next generation developer, whatever you want to do. To that end, there are some very specific adoption barriers that need to be overcome. I'm going to try and be very, very succinct, almost simplistic here. One is the operational model of the organization itself. Like the processes need to change. The data transfer and communication and dissemination needs to change. The communication channels need to change. So honestly, I'm talking about organizational restructure here. And the second thing is, or let me not number because, you know, I might go a long way. But another aspect is the culture, which I think both Dale and Val, like both of you guys, like sort of like hinted towards. As everyone knows, it's scientifically proven, construction is a very risk-averse industry. There are multiple reasons for that, but to try and stick more to the human aspect, I agree with you. Partially, it's the only thing that people know, so it's naturally difficult for them to deviate from that. But I'm gonna be a bit provocative here, like perhaps reluctantly. It's the politics, right? Around like we've been encountering that thing with Alice like many years now, right? Yeah, this is a better schedule, I'm not going to do it. Like, why? Like, initially, like in the first year, we're like flabbergasted. Like, what are you talking about? Like, and the reason was like, it hit us like a lead brick. Like, because if I show my boss, my PM, my owner a better schedule, I might get fired because they might tell me, why didn't you come up with it?
Oh, so is that the consensus? Is that the feeling out there, is it?
I would think so, in the sense that, you know, that professionals feel that, you know, and I totally understand them to some degree, to be honest with you, because a characteristic of a model-based parametric system like we have is transparency. So there's full visibility and transparency in the assumptions, in the data, the quality of data you're putting in. What are you assuming? So I guess the consensus is to position it more accurately, that transparency is stressing people out.
Yeah.
It's a big shift. And also it's a big shift. And I'm not going to like deviate any further, but sticking to the organizational like spectrum, it's a big difference is made through the company vision. Like one of our earliest customers with Alice, obviously I cannot say names, but one of the earliest customers in Alice who like onboarded with us like 3 years ago, you know, and I can tell you the product had a huge difference. So technology wasn't a decisive factor. The reason they did it was very simple. They wanted to become the most advanced developer in their geographic region. That was their vision, like, and it came top down, like from the CEO, like it disseminated throughout the rest of the company. I can keep on going.
No, I was just
another
on
big,
that point. Just before you get into the next point, I think you're right. I think we've had this conversation, Dale, haven't we, when we talk about the organizational breakdown structure not aligned to the workflow. And so you have these superstructure organizations siloed, doing their own thing and getting away with it. And what it does is it actually infects the rest of the business from having any kind of planning integrity. And you try and stem it as a project controls team or a PMO team. You try and get in there and standardize the works. But from that point on, in particular mega projects, it gets very complicated, because now you've got disconnections between what was real and what was inferred and what was guessed, and there's no real basis of where this information is coming from. But I really like the 2 points you mentioned before as well around transparency and integration. You touched on culture, which, you know, Dale and I, again, we super agree. And I'm going to go out on a little bit of a limb myself and just go direct to planners, any planners and schedulers listening. Hear me well. Evolve or die. Your role is as good as your value. So you need to be watching the trends in this area. And companies like yourselves, Alice, Dimi, there's N-Plan, there's a few other companies out there, Innate. We know these companies are kind of leading, pioneering in the construction space, pioneering in this machine learning space, and new ways of thinking about planning. I can't fathom for the life of me, and Dale and I have this frustration sometimes with resources, both in Australia and the UK. It's like, you know, your job is not at risk, but the way you do your job is. And that's the same for everybody. Software is going to be disrupted. Technology is going to disrupt every single industry sector you can think of. And it'll happen at different times. As we know, it'll be staggered. And politics is slowing that down. So there's a thing called the Digital Adoption Index. I don't know if you've heard of this. And Australia is in the stall out quadrant, despite having all the beautiful luxuries of a developed nation and all the fancy tools you can think of. We're stalling out. We're not adapting to change at a rate would be acceptable, or, you know, compared to other developed nations. And the reason, I think, is largely around what you referenced, is about resistance and politics and company cultures not being driven from the top down. I think that's a huge part to play in how you get on board with advancing digital currency. We have to be adaptive, and it's kind of counter to human nature to do that, isn't it?
Absolutely. Like, professionals need to know why. The leadership, both in the organization, in the particular organization, but also in the industry, needs to explain why. And you did a very nice, I guess, segue to that, like explain why their roles need to change, because there's a whole redefinition like endeavor here, right? It's redefining new roles, sorry, redefining existing roles, but also defining new ones, so that these new integrated processes can be supported. So that's sort of like, at least in my simpleton head, follows like the three ingredients, like people, process, and technology, in that order. If people do not understand why, and they will not follow the process. And if the process isn't there, supported by the people, no technology can enable it. I guess the tail end of what I had in mind is under this whole like restructuring thing is if I was asked to like pinpoint it, you know, a bit more specifically, it's about the decision-making process and model these organizations use. Right now, it's very, as we sort of like mentioned, rigid and very centralized. Like the PM needs to approve a lot of stuff and everything, which creates decision latency. But so unless that decision-making model does not become decentralized, I reckon, my humble opinion is, it's going to be very difficult to inject value engineering into the whole schema, right? So yeah, this is my
on that point.
opinion.
On that point, Dimi, I think, I mean, we've kind of gone into the structures of modern day projects and their challenges, and maybe we could talk about the comparative now. So you said critical path method. We said what's next. So if it's not critical path method, what's next? Can you explain maybe some of what the comparative is to the new solution, and why that would be a better option for those on projects, if that's easy to summate?
Absolutely. Yeah. My humble opinion, model-based approaches, model-based decision-making, because at the end of the day, in construction, everything is about decisions, like probably more so than any other industry. And to your words, it's about how you make those decisions. It's not really about the decision itself, because simply enough, things change. So whatever decision you make now, it's bound to change. So it's about like the approach to making that decision. AI definitely supports, you know, that new system or AI powered technologies, and ultimately, all these, like in my mind, sort of like have this the same cause, which is controlling the risk, controlling the variability, and being able to, like, I use a simplistic analogy here, peel the onion. Like, okay, everyone sees there's an onion here and, you know, it smells, but you need to peel it to see, you know, layer by layer, to see where this is coming from, why was it done this way, and so on and so forth. This is, I guess, a short version of my answer.
Yep. So the idea then is to provide, because it's about making informed decisions, right? It's about bringing in as many scenarios as possible through scenario models, is what you're saying, and other factors.
Yeah.
And then
I would call them. Sorry. Go on, mate.
Yeah. No, and then allowing them to make informed decisions with more information. Effectively, that's the end goal.
Exactly. Yeah. Precisely. It's about making that shift from experience-based decision-making to data-driven decision-making. Because today, this is the juxtaposition, right? Today, the decisions are made based on who slams their fist harder on the table, who looks the scariest, or who has the loudest voice. Which, by the way, let me highlight something here. Experience makes a ton of difference, and experience, the aspect of experience into this whole universe we're like discussing, will never go away. And let me tell you why. Because all the output of all those AI engines, model-based systems, so on and so forth, needs to be reviewed. And the main filter for that review is the experience. Like only an experienced superintendent, planner, project manager can look at a, computer-generated output and be, I don't know, excuse my French, this is bollocks, this works, that part, we can keep, and so on and so forth. So it's, as a result, it becomes an iterative process of learning. This is, to me, this is actually a huge problem in construction that the new technologies like AI engines and model-based systems can literally solve. It's about the reuse of knowledge. First off, allowing you to capture it in modeling the constraints, capturing the rules in your simulation, and so on and so forth. But then, and perhaps more importantly, reusing it. Because as you're going through these exploration, you're learning, your intuitive understanding of what really matters for your project, where the real risks rely, it increases.
That's fascinating. I want to go down a bit of a rabbit hole because we love rabbit holes on this podcast. So we chatted a little bit about how roles will change. And so I was thinking, okay, if I'm a planner or engineer, or project manager or controls person, what will it look like? Are those roles going to be molding into one, in your opinion, Dimi? Will it be a case of I'm now going to sit with, or maybe it's all three of those people, but in very much more similar roles? And we've spoken to Steve Wake about fusion skills rather than having these sort of, specialist roles. And is it a host of, it's a panel perhaps sitting around the same software model, as you're calling it, with their different inputs and experiences, also drawing on what AI and machine learning is giving them to make these informed decisions? Is that what it looks like?
I definitely agree with the panel aspect because there needs to be collaboration. And many, so that multiple voices from many angles and disciplines are heard and molded into an aligned decision. Which, as you, again, guys, you already know, this is a paramount factor why a lot of schedules are not being followed in the field, because the superintendent looks at the schedule and they're like, what is this? Like, when I build it this way. And the scheduler, like, again, as you guys accurately brought up earlier, gets offended because like, no, I made the schedule. I used all these man hours to do it, like, go and do it this way. And the guy's like, no, mate, you cannot build like that. Like, why didn't you bring me in earlier? This is I guess, one of the $1 million questions. Like, why didn't you bring me earlier? So I definitely agree with the panel aspect. About roles, I think it's going to be an amalgamation of two aspects. One is some existing roles we need to evolve. For example, I see personally the planner and scheduler transforming more into a model analyst, if you wish. Basically, the person who is going to look at the model assumptions, validate their soundness, and also reviewing the results, like the output of the model. I see on the same note, I see also additions and changes to some other existing roles. Like, for example, the project manager might become something like a model coordinator, essentially, specifying what this bloody thing is intended to do. Like, because like a lot of this, I'm gonna open a bracket here. A lot of, I think a useful analogy that, might help people, it helped me, but hopefully it's gonna help others, is look what happened with BIM, like as an adoption, right? A cornerstone principle of BIM has been purpose-based modeling. You're building BIM based on what you want to get out of it. You want to do energy analysis, you will need to structure your model differently. Do you want to do it for structural analysis? You need different type of model. And everyone, like, I think is experiencing this like limbo in of the correct adoption in BIM, because they're using the architect's model basically for everything. Same notion, in my humble opinion, applies to the construction models, or the scheduling models, as we call them at Stanford. You know, you need to specify, you know, questions and objectives. What do I want to get out of this parametric model, of this schedule model? So I see, you know, these management type positions like evolving to these types of roles, like model coordinator and everything. I see also new roles coming up. So model developer. So this technology, you know, needs someone to sit down and like build all those constraints, input the data to the system, you know, like make it all happen, like build the model. I am given, you know, the pulse and, you know, some reactions we've seen, you know, with trying to get companies to adopt our solution, is that role can be very easily taken on by new professionals. So Dale, you're a very experienced scheduler and planner. You've been building, you've been doing a lot of stuff for like decades. Why spend your time building constraints? Why spend your time, you know, setting up simulation models? Spend your time to think strategically and critically about, you know, those models and their output. So it was really fascinating to see the difference in the reaction and acceptance between experienced professionals and literally students. Like with experienced professionals, to your earlier arguments, like, why are you doing it this way? Does it CPM or P6 or MS Project does it that way? How can I do that thing in app? And you're like, mate, it's different. It's like apples and oranges. They're both fruit, but they're different fruit. But so that reaction is vastly different as compared to students who do not have these mental model biases, if you will. And you show them something like Alice, like a parametric model system, and they're like, ah, it makes sense. And we're like, okay, lads, this is how things, if you go out to work today, this is how things are done. And they look at us and they're like, why? You're asking too much, let's move on. But yeah.
No, that's fascinating.
These are my primary thoughts on the matter.
No, that's great. That's great. And I wanted to also bring in another aspect as well. So a lot of commercial aspects, contracts are set up based on, you know, critic path, float, you know, who gets compensated for what when things shift. Does it change the nature of our contractual setup now going into the future?
It might be, in the sense that I see moving a lot more towards alternative delivery methods because of that exact reason, right? It allows for a lot more flexibility and risk control earlier on. So everyone's happy. The GC, you know, has more room to protect and hopefully increase their profit margins. And the owner is going to be happier because they're going to get a higher quality product at the end of it. So this is, and I think that will be greatly enabled by the transparency of these model-based systems. Because again, as you guys know, today the owner has to like pull together, you know, like committees and construction team, like reviewers and all this kind of stuff, because they don't trust like whatever the GC is like giving them, right? They scrutinize it, and why is this and why is that? And what about this? What if this happens? You know, throwing all those curveballs. So in the future, I think the project delivery methods are going to become a lot more fluid, closer to what we currently experience as, you know, alternative delivery methods. I am hopeful that, you know, IPDs will become more of a norm. But that also, you know, depends on the design aspect of it, right? Like the correct adoption of BIM so that you can integrate everything like early on.
No, that's fascinating. And if I just may carry on peeling this onion a little bit more layer by layer.
Yeah.
Are we then saying that we might get to a stage where we can 3D print buildings? Are we going to get to that stage where we don't need construction workers because it's all been worked out by computers and, you know, it informs the machines and that they build the buildings on our behalf?
I'm sure there are many advocates out there, you know, in favor of that. I'm not one of them. I think, as I mentioned, the experience and the human aspect, I think it will be a big loss if it's taken out of the equation for construction. And I'm going to make like a parallelism here with artificial intelligence. And hopefully I'm not being too provocative, but I don't think artificial intelligence is the key. I think augmenting current intelligence is the key. Because as we said, or as I said, to be more accurate, I think we need that filter of experience. So I definitely believe we're moving towards a more industrialized version of construction, with the involvement of, you know, a lot of automation, a lot of model-based systems and stuff like that, and robots, you know, that everyone has started seeing already, you know, in site mapping applications, sensors in the field, safety applications, and so on and so forth. So I see the robots and all these like machinery coming in to like, as an aim to reduce risk and improve safety in construction. But I see 3D printing, you know, certain hazardous aspects of a building, not necessarily the whole building. But this is my position to it.
No, it's fascinating.
I would hate to see a fully robotic like construction site.
Yeah. It's when machines take over the world. And I'm going to hand to Val in a second. But I just wanted to kind of cover and go, well, okay, so what we're actually saying is that using technology and with a change of roles, you'll still get a critical path or multiple, depending on how you want to look at it. You know, you're just challenging the current critical path methodology that we're using today to get to that critical path. Is that what we're saying?
Yep.
Okay. So
yeah.
Because a lot of people will hear this and go, oh, so we're rubbishing the critical path. We're going, no, actually, there is still a critical path because you can't get rid of it. There is still the shortest path through your project.
Exactly.
But the way in which we get there, that is,
correct.
Brilliant.
It's not, if I can piggyback on that a little bit and try and close the loop, it's not just the way you get to it. It's also, how do you use it? And let me tell you why, because the critical path changes per the sequence of your workflow, and also per the instantiation of resources. Like, it's about the path your crews are following. When these two things change, the critical path changes. So depending on how you do stuff and how you treat the critical path and how do you react to those changes, because at the end of the day, it's about reacting to what's changing. So when something is changing, you need to see how you can leverage the critical path knowledge that you have, along with, my humble opinion, all the other potential critical paths, to properly gauge what is really critical for your project, right? Because I've heard like many discussions, right? Like, no, we cannot do this because that activity is on the critical path. So what if you do it differently?
Yeah. And
they're like, yeah, it's going to be, well, no, it's not going to be on the critical path, or you don't know. So you need to, for proper risk and variability control, you need to get a bird's eye view on all the other options that can be explored in order to make, a proper decision, I feel.
No, that's great. And just recalling from the debate we had, I think one of the debates was, well, you know, because we place such prominence on the critical path in the current day, everyone's so focused on that single critical path. But as you're
Mm-hmm.
alluding to, there's multiple paths that could be critical
Exactly.
if events change.
Yep.
And so what about the
Yep.
others, you know? And
Yep.
so we think we do it by using things like float erosion, etc. But are we really replicating reality? But it's so fascinating. But I'm going to hand over to Val because I know he's probably got burning questions there.
No, it's good listening to you guys and just having my own thoughts kind of crystallize. And I agree that there's going to be some challenges if we played this out, and you're effectively giving them an nth degree plan where the variations are unlimited, the opportunities are unlimited, and the critical path could be multiple dimensions. It could go down this route, depending on a number of factors.
Exactly.
That's going to be difficult in a contract world, I would imagine. As Dale
Mm-hmm.
pointed out, I think, how do you quantify the end date and get that in the contract and look to incentivize contractors to finish before that date? If the variables are always changing, it'll be very difficult for them to have something in place. Something that, you know, traditional or conventional planners love is certainty, and they try to communicate this back up the stream to the directors, and the directors are very nervous if forecasts change. And every month you'll have PMO and controls come in, and they'll want explanations into why numbers have changed, why times have changed, why dates have moved.
Yep.
And it's like, because this is a project, that's what happens on a project. The goal has always been, I think, is to try and take a snapshot at a point in time where you think you have the most information possible, the most plausible, realistic, constructible project. You say, let's take a snapshot. We've got something. That becomes the baseline. Then your goal is to maintain that. Your goal is to maintain as close as you can to achieving what you set out in the baseline. Now, I don't know for the people listening, and I don't know for Dale, but all the projects I've been on, the baseline is almost irrelevant after the fact, and generally because of the way we do baselines. We rush people. There's a lot of politics, as you mentioned. Estimations aren't really done properly. People have lack of training. It's not facilitated properly by professionals who have done it before. And then we take a snapshot to appease the client. I'm getting to a point, don't worry. And I think one of the concerns is that if we produce, and for, like you said, you mentioned before, if you told, I can train a data scientist PMO faster than I can train a PMO guy data science. And this is exactly around your point, is they have no biases, no limiting factors in their brains or belief systems that make them do certain things. And there is a danger. This is why we're trying to unbreak the mold or break the mold a bit, is to say to planners, actually, you're going to have to break the conventional ways of which you deliver projects if you're going to provide multiple simulations of what could happen. Now, the problem, I think, and maybe you can comment on this, is we present a director of a project with a multifaceted, multidimensional variability model. And it says it could hit here, 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 here. Now, what's the difference between that and, let's say, a Monte Carlo simulation? And how do we stop decision fatigue at that level, from your perspective?
What's the best way to answer that question? For me, okay, let me take my poor man's attempt. I think there are many levels of certainty, depending on, what level you are talking about. At the snapshot level that, you guys brought up, it's a snapshot. It's one of the many other, alternatives of that snapshot. But there's a layer above it which allows you to see a higher level of, which allows you to assume a higher level of certainty or a more bird's eye view. Basically, I guess the structure that I have in mind is, a plan can generate many schedules. Those schedules can be resource loaded, but each resource loaded schedule can have many CPM schedules for simplicity, right? Because again, the workflow and you know, the path for the crews, you know, can have many different ways. The certainty between these different like layers is different, right? So a director should be looking more at the higher level to see what is the overall certainty for my project. Like, for example, your steel crew can be critical for this like scenario or that particular like X option. But it might not be critical in 85% of all other options. If I try to make some sense here. So that's how I would go about it. Whether you're using like Monte Carlo or, you know, like search algorithms or anything else to like assess, you know, that certainty, to me, it ultimately and perhaps qualitatively comes down to that, like what level of certainty are you gauging at?
So you're thinking it's more like, and I know I'm putting it on the spot. I mean, this is something that, you know, every project struggles with. It's not something that's simple, and it's different for each project. But you're saying something like that. You're basically giving it a confidence score, and maybe if you had multi-varied scenarios, the machine or the system could calculate which ones are more viable and then roll that up. To kind of, so you've got this, so it's not everything's volatile and everything's kind of spewing out different numbers. It's actually saying there's some areas here which may change. It's giving you some variability counters, but overall it will give you a certainty score. Is that something like that?
Correct, absolutely. And this is, I guess, what is, I didn't want to sound biased, but this is, I guess, a leniency towards like the Monte Carlo approach in terms of sampling, right? Because you're essentially, what you're doing, you're like sampling from a pool of thousands of potential like CPM schedules. In order to, from that sampling, you're getting a higher level confidence level or criticality score or criticality metric, call it or baptize it however you want. But yes.
Okay, that's great. And my last question from my perspective on this before I pass over to Dale is around, you mentioned uncertainty before. And so, you know, one way to avoid uncertainty is to, you know, to retrieve and recall knowledge from previous projects. We used to call them lessons learned, but we've talked to people like Dr. Dan Patterson about how you get benchmarking from, you know, similar projects or similar categories of projects or classifications of projects back into the system to prescribe, not predict, but prescribe what a good schedule would look like. Is that something you're also looking at?
Looking at, you know, at Alice or me?
Yeah, in general, in model planning, I think is more general than that.
To be, I see. To be fairly honest, no, mate. Because each of those because first off, you know, it's all that is based on historical averages, and you know, it's statistically proven. There's a huge flaw in taking averages, you know, into only averages into consideration. That doesn't mean that doesn't render it useless, right? But the other thing, the other reason behind me saying no is all those predictions based on old schedules and all this, that approach, they're predictions based on a particular sequence or approach. But again, we're back in the same question, like it's a vicious cycle. What about all the other stuff that could have happened? And I mean, to me, it's a bit like contradictory. Like every construction project is unique. It's different. I know there can be some patterns, but can there in the sense that, because now we're going down into the rabbit hole, right? How accurately have you been tracking your schedule? Like how accurate is your as build, and accurate to what level? Because for example, there is a delay, you're fixing, you know, the actual start and end time, but did you fix the relationships, for example? Back into that peeling the onion aspect, right, of transparency. Like being able to answer why something happened, either in planning or during execution. What else can I say? And I guess I'm going to wrap up my my succinct answer, hopefully succinct, is it's difficult for me to get like good quality of data with a proper structure, with a proper level of detail and all this kind of stuff without standardized modular processes and without in order, to your words, to efficiently capture the knowledge so that you're able to reuse it, and also without formalized QC steps in the whole process, right? In order to verify validity and suitability of that data for those purposes.
Yeah, no, that's such good points. I mean, I kind of put that up. I didn't mean to set you up. It's a difficult thing to answer because it's different on each project. And one of the things you come back to is the fact that data quality isn't always there. And so, and when you do collect data, there's always a level of bias that comes with it. Like, it's the opposite to saying having a lessons learned versus a black box on an airplane that records everything, records all the instruments, records all the communications, records everything. That for me would be, you know, the kind of the Elysium of machine learning. Is if it was a black box recording of a project and had everything in it, from culture to organizational structures to all the data to every decision ever made. That to me would be, then you could build off that anything you want. But we are far, far from that. Is that true?
I would not far, but far, because it delves back into that systemic restructuring that needs to happen, right? To that end, I think emerging technologies, especially for the field, like real life data feedback, sensoring, and all those like amazing tools that, you know, a lot of companies and solutions are enabling professionals to more accurately and holistically, if I may add, track the progress of production. I think that's a huge step towards, let's say, shedding some light on that black box. Nonetheless, for me, humbly, the essence lies in the integration that we mentioned in the beginning. How do you map all those things together so that your project control system can accurately reflect reality?
Yeah, thanks, Dimi. I mean, I could keep going on. I think we're going to have another podcast session, or even maybe just a few beers.
Happy to.
But it's so fascinating. I'm going to pass off to Dale now for some questions. Thanks.
Cheers, Val. Yeah, so actually this brings us to one of our favorite parts of the pod. The whole pod's our favorite part, but one of our favorite parts, maybe the cherry on the top, or a bit of, you know, sprinkles, a bit of fun, Dimi. This part of the pod is called Defend the Indefensible. So how this works is we put our guest through to defend a ridiculous statement for 30 seconds. It's a bit of fun. So if you're up for that, I'm happy to put you in the hot seat.
Sure. There's enough hot here in California, but yeah, let's make it hot.
Okay. Are you ready?
Sure.
Okay. So the statement, I'll read out the statement and then you have 30 seconds to defend it. The CPM is tried and tested. All this other tech is nonsense. Defend that. 30 seconds starts now.
It is, okay. Oh my God, this is so difficult. It is definitely tested. There are decades and myriads of projects that have been delivered with CPM. I actually, although this is supposed to set me up, but I actually agree to some degree with a statement, because for every new technology, every new method, any new theoretical frontier, you need to crash test it. And, you know, that's why we at Alice, we spent like 3 years doing R&D, because we're like translating all those construction constraints into parametrical equations. We're like, can it happen? We didn't know. Hopefully we were able to do it, but I actually agree with it. Like, and you know, the other aspect to it is the following. it's impossible to accurately simulate 100% of reality. So you need some relative confidence level into the accuracy of your model. And that's why I believe it's gonna take a lot of testing and trials and iterations for us to be able to formulate assumptions and objectives properly, in order to properly use and extract the value from these new technologies and methods.
Brilliant, brilliant.
That's great.
Yeah, thanks for being such a great sport. It's great fun because, you know, technologies like what you're doing is disrupting the industry, and you will have, and as you've alluded to, a lot of sort of people just go, no, it's not going to work, it's not going to happen. But we thought we'd bring this in for season 3, where we, you know, put one of these ridiculous statements to our guests and have a bit of fun with it. So thank you for being such a good sport with that.
Oh, thank you. It's been fun indeed.
It has been great fun. And as Val says, you know, we'd love to have you back, you know, for a part 2. There's so much we can go with that. And there's so many more subtopics that we haven't discussed, I guess.
Yeah, but I guess we can talk about why CPM fails, right? We delved into the hot new stuff, which is great. I enjoyed it very much.
Exactly.
Okay, like
exactly.
My poor man's effort to become funny, but continue.
No, I appreciate your candor and your openness to everything. It's been brilliant. But was there, before we sign off, is there any final thoughts you want to leave our listeners with?
If you don't, all right, I'm gonna be a bit rude again. If you don't bend over a little bit, like, it's going to be difficult to move forward. So to kind of tie it back to the hot seat game, yes, there are many friction, adoption friction and barriers. Yes, if we don't like try and overcome them, like no matter how painful it is, like you will never ever change. So I don't know. It might sound a bit cynical, but if you don't want to change, to me it sounds like you're okay with projects being over budget and over time, at least to some degree. Like you're comfortable with it.
Yeah.
So it's about, you know, paying up first and then reaping the gains. So all of us need to pay up, like with sweat, work hours, and fruitful, informative discussions like you guys are hosting.
Thanks, Dimi. Appreciate it. And very wise words to finish off with. Val, any final thoughts?
No, it's great having you on, Dimi. As Dal said, we look forward to another podcast. You know, I'll leave you with a quote that one of my favorite quotes of all time is by a guy called Alfred Korzybski. I always get names wrong. And he says, the map is not the territory. He talks about semantics, but it's exactly how model-based planning works, right? You'll never get reality. You can only get as close as possible. And I think it's a really great way to picture it in people's minds if they're listening. But yeah, thanks for your time and your insight. It's been really great and honest and upfront and authentic. And hopefully people get on board with the future.
Thank you. And if I can piggyback a bit on your last point, a quote from a famous statistician. You know, statistics was of the you know, pioneering, you know, fields using models to make decisions and gauge insights from. All models are wrong, essentially, but some are useful. Perfect. So that what I would like to close it up. Really appreciate it. Really enjoyed it. Looking forward to continue the discussion. You guys are great. I really enjoyed it. The discussion, the questions, the back and forth.
Thanks, Dimi. Appreciate it. Just before we go, we have a quick pop quiz. If you're up for that, just 10 questions and 10 quick fire answers. You up for that?
Yeah.
Fantastic. So let's fire. What is your morning routine?
Meditation. Otherwise, I'm not getting through my day in a healthy manner.
Lovely. Question 2. How do you usually plan out your day?
How do I?
How do you usually plan out your day?
Like every other product manager, I write a lot. So I've tried many tools like Trello, blah, 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 with fancy stuff. For me, nothing beats an old school calendar to
Nice.
keep you focused, write down what really matters, and focus on the stuff that, are impactful.
Nice. Question 3, how do you deal with stress? I think you already mentioned it, but how do you deal with stress?
Meditation and Muay Thai.
Muay Thai. Oh, there we
Nice.
go. Martial arts. Lovely. Question 4, what is your favorite book, audio, or movie?
Favorite book, audio, or movie? I don't read that much. I read when I have a targeted subject or matter in my mind I want to learn about. So one of my favorite books that I read lately is, I think, Design Your Work Life or something. So yeah,
Great.
that would be my favorite book. Like favorite movies, I like a lot of horror stuff, so I don't think you want to go there.
I think we work in horror movies on the projects we work on.
Too much horror, exactly.
Exactly. Question 5, who is your hero and why?
Who is my hero and why? I'm gonna give I haven't thought of it, to be honest with you, but I would give a cliche answer, given that this is a pop quiz. My dad, because although he didn't have formal education, he educated himself and he became very successful, like professionally. But at the same time, he didn't sacrifice his integrity and his identity for the sake of, making a lot of money or, grabbing a fat title. So yeah, that would be a tough answer.
Love that. Question 6, what is your favorite sound?
My favorite sound in terms of music or in general?
Anything.
I listen to a lot of death metal.
Nice.
So
a common one.
I don't want to go into bands.
No, that's great. That's great. A common answer we had is silence, which is not actually a sound, but anyway, death metal is the opposite. So it's great. Question 7. Question 7. What is the biggest mistake you've made on a project?
Biggest mistake I've made on a project. One of the earliest pilot projects for Alice, I set up the constraints wrong, and the formwork was not utilized accurately. The customer didn't notice it, and I noticed it midnight before the final presentation. And as you may already understand, I didn't sleep to try and correct it. And next morning, I had to communicate, why are the results different? But thankfully, they appreciated my candor, thankfully, and they were like, thank you for doing it. So yeah, it ended up well, but that was like huge because it was one of the earliest ones, and I was like so stressed out. Like if that didn't work, or someone picked it up, like it might have, obviously I'm speculating, but it might have dealt a non-negligible hit or blow to the trust, for what you're trying to do.
No, agreed. That's great for sharing. Thank you for that. Question 8, what would you tell your 10-year-old self?
What would I tend to my 10-year-old self? Again, I'm going to be a bit rude. Keep calm and do whatever the F you want to do.
Amazing. Awesome advice. Question 9, what profession other than your own would you like to have attempted?
Oh, architecture. Definitely. I really, and that's why in my bio, there's this sustainable design thing. Through Solvia, I tried to do sustainable design through BIM because I really love architecture because it sort of like marries artistic expression with engineering. So I would like to have attempted that. Given the stuff that I know now, it might have been a bad choice because I become overly obsessed with details. So I'm not sure if I became an architect, I would have become a balanced person, but I would have definitely like to try it out.
Brilliant. Last question. If you had to spend $1 million in a day, what would you spend it on?
Ooh, easy. I would buy a cabin in the woods, obviously, for me. and I would spend the rest on some form of charity, like, you know, building an orphanage, building, you know, schools or something, or a conservatoire, because I play guitar, so I would like more kids to learn music. So yeah, something like that.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, Dimi, thank you so much again. As Val said, it was such a pleasure to have you, and we had
Same
so
here,
much fun.
lad. Really appreciate it.
And we will definitely keep in touch and then get you back for a future pod just for the updates and see where things have gone. But folks, that is all we have time for on this episode. But it doesn't have to stop there. You can support our charities and access blogs at projectchatterpodcast.com. Remember, don't forget to hit subscribe on our YouTube channel and your favorite podcast player so you don't miss the next one. A massive thank you to our guest, Mr. Dimi Farmakis. Did I pronounce that correctly? I hope I did.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And thank you all for listening. Till next time, we say stay safe, be disruptive, and have fun doing it. From me and Val, it's bye for now.